All right, so what we're going to be reviewing in this video is solving equations by completing the square when a equals 1. Before we even do anything, let's review a few important things. What is a? If you'll remember in a quadratic equation, it looks something like this. 2x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Okay? And we can assign for each of these coefficients, the leading, this one, and this one, or this number, constant, we assign a variable to that. And we use that in a bunch of different ways. And here, the leading coefficient is always a. And it actually looks like this in formula terms. Ax squared plus 4x plus c. I'm sorry, b. That's a b there. My bad. Anyway, that's a b. So if you see the leading coefficient in this example, a equals 2, b equals 4, and c equals -1. And that is the two coefficients of the first two terms and the constant in the back, which is your -1 in this case, which is c. So that's just a quick review of what is going on when you have a quadratic equation and what the a represents. That's the leading coefficient, the number in front of the x squared. If there is no number and it's just blank, it's considered a 1 because 1 is the only number you could place there that won't change the x squared. So let's take a look at this example. Example number 1. X squared plus 16x equals 36. Okay, so I put a little space here because this is going to be by completing the square, so it'll make it a little easier. But usually you won't see that space. Now, how do I know that this is the type of problem that I would complete the square with? Well, first of all, completing the square means you're going to add a number to both sides that will make this a perfect square and this side here a perfect square. And remember, whenever we add to one side, we have to do the same to the other. So when I look at this, I say, okay, there is no number. It's A, B, and then there's no C. And there's a number on this side. That's a pretty good candidate for completing the square. At least I'm going to try that. And the first thing I do, we have a little hint, which is you're going to take your B term and divide it by 2 and square it. And that's going to help us find the perfect square here. All right, so what is my B term? Well, my first term is A, right? That would be no number, so it's a 1. My B term here is 16. So I am going to substitute where I see 16 divided by 2. Okay, 16 divided by 2 is 8. So inside this parentheses is 16 divided by 2, that's squared. So 8 squared is 64. I am going to add 64, and I'm going to do it in color, on both sides. Okay, cool. Now when I do that, what happens? I get x squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 36 plus 64 is 100. Now, 100 is a perfect square. And x squared, now here, we're going to make this a perfect square. What does a perfect square mean? It means it's multiplied by itself. So x squared is x, and what times what is 64? 8, which is what we had here, right? And when I add 8 times 8, let's see, 8 times 8 gives me 64. And when I add it, I get 16, right? Which is exactly what I want. And this is positive. So this is positive 8, positive 8. And this is 10 squared. Okay, I'm going to rewrite this as a square. In the future, and I'm going over this carefully, in the future, you just basically say whatever was number here, you're going to, it's positive 8 plus 8, right? X plus 8, that's where we get the 8 from squared. I'm going to take the square root of both sides because they are both perfect squares. When I do that, right, x plus 8 equals plus or minus square root of 10. Because this answer here could either be a plus or a minus. Okay, whatever this is, it could be a plus or a minus. So we're just going to put that plus or minus here. And what I like to do is I'm going to show if it's a positive answer or a negative answer. And we write x plus 8 equals positive square root of 10, or just square root of 10. And we're going to subtract 8 from both sides. And we get x equals minus 8 plus the square root of 10. And over here, when it's minus, all right, it's still x plus 8, that does not change, equals minus the square root of 10. I subtract 8 from both sides. This cancels. X equals negative 8. Instead of plus 10, it's basically the same thing, but it's minus 10, minus square root of 10. And this is one of my answers, and this is the other. Now, generally speaking, if you had a calculator, you can put this as a decimal, and you would say negative 8 plus whatever decimal that is, which would probably be, let's see, 2 squared, 3.1, and a bunch of numbers behind it. But anyway, so this would be like negative 4.9 or so, and this would be like negative 11.1, blah, blah, blah. But we can just leave it like that as a square root. And that's how you do an example like this using the perfect square. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is another example, which hopefully it'll come out a little bit easier. So, and this I'm going to show you when my a is 1. So let's do another example with this. And that would be x squared minus 10x equals 11. Now, this is the perfect candidate for completing the square because there's no number here. There's an a. This is for when my a is equal to 1. We use this shortcut, b divided by 2 squared equals 2. In this case, my a is 1, my b is negative 10, and my c, I don't have a number for c. I'm going to put 0. And then I have an 11 on the other side. So to figure out how I would complete this square and be able to make both sides perfect squares, I need to find what b is. And my b is, this is a, there's no number, it's 1, right? b is negative 10. So I'm going to place negative 10 divided by 2 squared. That gives me negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5 squared, which is 25. So I am going to take that 25 and I'm going to add it to both sides, plus 25 plus 25. Okay? Now, when I do that, I get x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 36. Okay? Now we're going to make this into 1 parenthesis squared. It would be like 2 parentheses multiplied by itself. Your squared means you're just multiplying it by itself. My x is x times x. And that 25, what did we get in here in the middle? Negative 5 minus 5. Okay, and if I square x minus 5 times x minus 5, I get negative 5 times negative 5, positive 25, and negative 5x minus 5x gives me negative 10x, all equal to 36. Okay, I take the square root of both sides. I get x minus 5, drop the square, plus or minus, what's the square root of 36? 6. Pretty simple, right? Look at how easy. Let's do the positive side. X minus 5 when my answer is positive. And whenever you're taking the square root of both sides and there's a variable there, you have to do the positive and the negative. That took me a long time to get when I was in high school myself. So once you get that through your head, these problems become a lot easier. So we take a positive and a negative. X minus 5 when my answer is a negative answer. Okay, and I add 5 to both sides. I add 5 to this side too, but my answer is a little different because this is the positive and that's the negative. X equals 11 and x equals negative 1. And that is how you find the perfect square, how you complete the square in order to find out what your x's can possibly be. This only works, that b over 2 squared only works when my a coefficient is 1. In other words, it's like there's no number there. Okay, so I hope that helps. And if you need to watch it again, watch it again.